Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Doogee S99 smartphone. I first took a look at a Doogee smartphone last year, the S63 Pro, and I was mostly looking at it because the company has very high claims when it comes to the camera performance. So I was interested in actually kind of putting that through the paces of my typical lens, testing to see if it actually would compare. It didn't, to give you the quick summation of that, although I did really like the phone in other areas. And so I was interested in taking a look at this newer phone because it has even higher claims, 108 megapixel AI triple camera on here. And what I found is very similar to what I found with the X63, that the strengths that were there in the S63, they're certainly here in the S99, and maybe even more so, but some of those same weaknesses remain, though a few have been corrected. So let's dive in and take a look at that here today. Brief summation of what we've got here is we have an Android 12 based phone. It has 8 gig of RAM. It has 128 gig of built-in ROM. It has the ability to fast charge with a USB Type-C up to 33 watts. And so, and it also has a very large capacity battery, which leads to one of the great strengths for the particular phone. It has a 6,000 mAh battery, which just seems to go on, if you're accustomed as I am to typically using an iPhone, the battery seems to go on forever on these Doogee phones. And I noticed that the even larger capacity here in the S99 is able to handle its higher processing power and able to still deliver really fantastic battery life. And so what I have used these phones for a lot, where I think that they really thrive, is actually on a job site, doing a lot of on-site work, maybe streaming a lot of media to a Bluetooth speaker or something similar like that, or using it in a dusty, rough environment, because it is similar to the S61 or S63, whatever it is, in the S99, in that it has a lot of the same things to where it almost feels like the phone itself comes protected in a case. You get used to iPhones that are so slim, excuse me, that are so slim and seem very fragile on their own, whereas this feels like a very tough phone. But basic difference is that whereas with the cheaper phone, everything is basically plastic, here a lot of it seems to be metal, and so it does feel much more upscale in terms of the basic feel, though that does come with a cost when it comes to weight. On my scale, this weighs out at 320 grams, and so it's not a lightweight device. It is noticeably heavier to pick it up, more than 50 grams heavier than what the S61 was. And so, it's a little bit larger, but mostly it's heavier because of the basic materials. But it is also extremely tough. It can be submersed. It's got an IP68 and an IP69K rating. And so it is submersible up to 30 minutes in 1.5 meters of water. It is dust proof, so it worked very well as a work phone in a very dusty environment, including drywall dust, which if you've worked around that, you know how insidious it is in terms of being destructive. The drop proof rating is even higher with this S99. Instead of 1.5 meters, it is 1.8 meters. And so this is a phone that is made to be dropped in the way that the typical phones that I used are not made to be dropped. And so if you're someone that keeps breaking their phones, you might want to consider something like this. It's not as pocketable maybe, but it certainly is tougher in and of itself. I did notice that not only were the actual build here upgraded and the materials are very nice, as you can see, but it also was noticeably faster in performance. We have a Helio G96 octa-core processors here at 2.1 gigahertz. I noticed that Wi-Fi performance was faster and that the Wi-Fi radio was able to get signal faster, though I will note this is still not Wi-Fi 6 compatible, unfortunately. It also has a slightly larger screen. Rather than a 6-inch screen on the last one I reviewed, this has a 6.3 IPS screen, and the resolution is considerably higher. We have resolution at 2,340 by 1080 pixels, and so greater than full HD resolution. The screen itself is Corning Gorilla Glass, which obviously helps with that toughness and ability to drop it. For the price, it obviously comes with a nice amount of built-in storage, and it also has the advantage of being expandable in terms of its storage, and you can expand it up to 1 terabyte through dropping in a compact card there, and so you have the ability to really dramatically expand the amount of onboard room that you have. And I do find that, for whatever reason with this phone, as compared to my Apple devices, that the battery doesn't, excuse me, not the battery, but the storage doesn't tend to get eaten up as much with just, kind of the random stuff that Apple tends to throw in there. Another thing that I've liked about both of these phones is, for one case in here, the actual volume buttons up and down, they're nicer on this phone. But what I've noted compared again to my Apple devices is that there's more variability in the volume control. I really like that because one of my things is that if I wake up too early in the morning, I can kind of go back to sleep if I listen to an audiobook, but I want it to be at a very kind of quiet level, and so that it just allows me to relax. And so it's just enough to distract my mind from racing for a few minutes and I'm back off to sleep. But being able to keep that volume level both very low and then obviously to take it up high when needed is something that is very nice. I also noted that one of the things that I criticized on this one is I felt like the face recognition and the touch for fingerprint recognition on the side, that they just didn't work nearly as well as what I was accustomed to. They do definitely work better on the S99, and so I would call it very comparable to what I'm seeing from more expensive Apple devices as far as either the face recognition or the fingerprint recognition on the side, which I was able to very quickly set up and deal with there. So everything worked really, really nice on that front. And as far as the functionality of the actual actually using the phone, it just works better. Everything works faster in terms of, it's noticeably superior to this one in terms of the way that things open and the amount of power I have. I also noted that for whatever reason, both of these tend to be more stable in playing. Sometimes we play like with groups, games, say like Psych, for example, is one of the apps that we use where everybody has their own device and they're, doing trivia or whatever and entering answers. For whatever reason, sometimes the much more expensive Apple devices won't work in that setting, whereas these inexpensive Doogee ones do. So, take that for whatever it's worth. But functionally, as a phone, it tends to do a pretty good job. Calls are nice and clear, texting, all of that works nicely. It has the haptic feedback, which is pretty common in a lot of Android devices and less common in an Apple device. All of those things worked. And on the camera front, I did note that it says it has phase detect autofocus. I did note that you do get the box of face tracking. And so, that's a visible thing that's happening. It seems to work okay. However, some of these claims on the camera front is where things fall apart for me as a photographer. 108 megapixels, which would exceed even, say the Fujifilm GFX 100 medium format camera. That ain't happening, not even close. It has a 64 megapixel night vision camera, and then a 16 megapixel wide angle and macro camera, and then a 32 megapixel front-facing camera. All of these claims, by the way, are severely overstated, and we're going to dive into the reason for that. So let's take a quick look at just a quick breakdown of some of the actual image quality here and to see why those claims are distorted. So we'll start by taking a look at what is my fundamental issue with the marketing here. So first of all, we'll take a quick look at a series of images here. Now, according to this statistic, we have a huge amount of resolution, that 102 megapixels. We've got an image that is just massive, 12,000 by nearly 9,000 pixels. And so you think, oh, that's incredible. However, if we look at this image at 100% here, we are going to find that it is a severely over-sharpened. So if you look at it at just a pixel level, you can see that it has just been upscaled and upscaled to where you have basically lost all relevant detail. So while it might look reasonably okay at this kind of level, we can see that any kind of artifact, for example, here you can see a little bit of like bokeh back here. You can see just how that over-sharpening has really damaged everything. So in reality, looking at this at something like a 25% level is probably about as high as what you would want to go. And so that is just, on my 4K monitor, that's just barely zooming in at all. Even if you look at it at a 50% level, you can just see all the artifacts from the over-sharpening. And if we look at the actual raw image, and so being able to get raw, of course, is awesome here. But the raw image betrays a lot of the truth. First of all, it shows us what our actual native resolution here, and that native resolution is around the 16 megapixel range. And so everything else beyond that, and by the way, you can look at this and you can tell this is the most natural looking image here. And if I were to scale that up to
200%, it still looks better than what that JPEG was. But in reality, we're working with something that's more like a 400%. And you can see here that, we're starting to see that over sharpening. It still doesn't look as bad as what the JPEG did at the 400% magnification, but you can see how they're getting to that figure. And it's just really a scaling thing to where you're taking a base image of about 16 megapixels and then scaling it up to the 102 megapixels. Now, what's unfortunate about all of this is that I actually find that other than the white balance not being great, that the camera shooting in RAW is actually fairly decent for a phone camera. You can see here that the detail is quite good. And as I pointed out before, the bokeh is not fantastic, but it is it's a phone camera. Another example here, more of a landscape. Now we can see there are some flare artifacts, which we'll visit more in just a moment. But we can see here that the detail is, it's pretty usable in this image. And of course, being able to get a raw image means that you can do some editing. Once again, we see a little bit of flare artifacts, but if I look at the detail on the subject here without it being terribly over sharpened, it really looks fairly good. Another shot here where the flare is a little less obvious. And in this case, I can see that chromatic aberrations aren't too bad, that our contrast looks fairly good. Overall, a pretty nice looking image. Now here's another great example here. If we look at the raw image here, which I have, kind of played with the white balance to give it a little bit more of a polar look, but we see that amount of resolution there. And so if we zoom into a pixel level, the detail here looks pretty good. You can see all the crisp little ice crystals being formed, and it looks quite good. If I look at the accompanying JPEG image, which of course is at that very high resolution level of, you can just see that at 102 megapixels, which is just scaled up, it's a mess. It's just halos and artifacts and really looks pretty terrible. And I'd have to look at it at about a 33% magnification level before, that's basically the limit to what I could go before it starts to look over sharpened, and even here a little bit over sharpened there. Here's another raw image that I have cropped to a 69, and so you can see that after cropping, there isn't a whole lot of depth to go into there further. But I mean, this is an image that you could print and it would work just fine, and obviously it has produced a nice looking image. Here's another shooting into the sun, and you can see some flare artifacts there, but you can also see that it's a fairly attractive image, good contrast, and there's enough ability there to edit it to produce a good looking shot. Now out of the camera, the white balance, as noted on the DNGs, is a little bit, wonky. But as you can see here, I was able to do some serious processing to this image and actually get a great looking image, being able to bring back some good sky textures there. And if I zoom in here to a pixel level, the detail is good. Now on the right, I've just got like the 16 megapixel result, and so I don't love the white balance here. And you can see even at 16 megapixel, there's a little bit of some over sharpening that kind of smears a little bit of the detail, but the actual raw image is useful, and I like, for a camera phone, I like what I'm able to produce with it. Now, like a lot of recent iPhones, it has this, portrait mode that essentially just, it kind of creates a fake bokeh by just highlighting the subject itself and then blurring everything else out. It's not an effect that I particularly love because, as a real photographer, it just doesn't look natural to me. Now, one thing I will say for the onboard JPEG engine is that in many cases it does produce a better out-of-the-camera result than what you're going to get. Like I said, I find that the white balance is just a little bit weird on the raw files, and so you will have to process that. But you can see on the right side, the JPEG has produced a more credible result. This is also what they would consider their macro mode, and so it's not like a one-to-one type macro, but you can see that up close it's producing some decent images, and it uses one of the cameras to allow for more of an up-close type look. And so anyway, as a byproduct, it's able to produce a decent-looking image up close.
So bottom line there is that basically we're working with the same actual 16 megapixels of resolution that I saw on this camera, and so it's just scaling and unfortunately and oversampling, and as a byproduct it's basically unusable at those higher resolutions, and their file size is much larger, and so there's literally no reason to do that. So if you buy the phone, it can take decent pictures, not great white balance, but decent pictures if you shoot at the lower resolution levels, but do not go into those higher resolution levels. There's just no reason for it. So I do appreciate the fact that you can shoot RAW here, and so you do get a little bit of flexibility for adjusting the images, but beyond that, it's just not worth playing with some of the expanded capabilities there. The other limitation here is that while video performance is a little bit better than the S61 Pro, we're still only getting 2K video. It was full HD on this, but I also find that much like the higher resolutions of the photos, the video is noticeably over sharpened, and also it's not nearly well stabilized as, say, for example, my current phone that I'm using is the 2020 iPhone SE 2, and it actually works quite well in terms of stabilization and the video I can get from it. Also, a negative versus the S61 Pro is that we have lost a headphone jack, and so unfortunately you're stuck with a USB-C to headphone dongle adapter if you're going to do that. So that's kind of a pain because I really love that aspect of this, and so I'm actually the reason I held on to this. I'm using it more as a media type device, huge storage, has a headphone out jack, and this is a step in the wrong direction in my opinion on that. Also right now, another negative is that there is no 5G. The limit seems to be 4G LTE as a limit, and as noted previously, no Wi-Fi 6. And then also, I just don't love that marketing. Trying to, it's pasted right on there, 108 megapixel. There's no 108 megapixels here, and it's only through software, scaling up that you're getting anywhere near that. So I just find that kind of marketing to be a little bit deceptive, and so I'm not crazy about that. So in summation, this excels to me as a media device, as something with very long battery life. The battery lives up to specification. It does seem to be very tough, and I know after using the S61 and the S99 in these very kind of rough and tumble settings and environments, they do hold up as tough devices. And so all of that is, I think, really, really great. The camera claims are obviously overrated, and some of the specs are outdated. However, it's also a pretty decent value proposition. Right now, it's about $350. It is a lot of phone for that as far as the storage and the specifications and the screen, and obviously that battery life. And so, and if you're looking for something that is rough for work to take onto a job site or something similar, I think that it is well worth consideration on that front. I hope this helps you out today. Maybe a little bit different kind of review, but I'm going to do these periodically because it's interesting, and I like to see what's actually happening on what has become the largest camera market in the world, which is the cameras that are found on smartphones. And so, at least as far as this case, we've got a long way to go to comparing to actual photography gear. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you look in the description down below, you can find, not Nala, but you can find links to my buying links for this and further information on it. Also links to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron, to sign up for my newsletter. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.